Hello, Wargamers. My name is Chandler, and welcome to Line of Sight Bites. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the top 10 non-unique Warcaster nukes in Warmachine. What exactly does that mean? This is specifically spells that are on Warcasters, or Warlocks, of course, or Infernal Masters. That are, so not on solos. Some of these are on solos, but they have to primarily be on a Warcaster or Warlock. That are, what exactly did I call a nuke? That is going to be something that is an offensive spell that has a POW associated with it. This means that a couple of random spells got kind of shut out that are arguably nukes, but they weren't going to be on top 10 anyway, so I didn't really worry too much about it. And beyond that, they also need to be non-unique. We're going to talk about unique spells at another time. Go over like a nice top 10 list of the best unique spells in Warmachine. But for this, we're talking about spells that are on multiple casters, basically. So if it's just on a single caster, or on, like, multiple versions of the same caster, I still kind of called that a unique spell. This is stuff that's on at least 2 casters, which a couple of these spells are. So we're going to jump into it with our number 10, which is the wonderful Gallows. So Gallows was kind of hotly contested. There was a terrible argument within the Line of Sight chat. No, not really, but... Jaden put Rift at the top 10, in the 10th spot, I should say. I felt like Gallows won over it just a little bit, but they are situationally very different. So Rift gets kind of our honorable mention as like the number 11. What does Gallows do? Gallows is a cost 3, range 10, POW 13 nuke. When it hits the target, which is wonderful, it's not on damage, when it hits the target, it's going to pull that target d6 inches, or pushed, in more specific Warmachine terminology, push that target d6 inches directly towards the point of origin. This means that if you have an arc node, it's going to pull towards that arc node, because that is the actual point of origin. So why is Gallows good? For one, range 10 is good, POW 13 is very, very good. The other thing is that this is and this is going to be a bit of a theme with a couple of these spells, being able to relocate enemy models is one of the strongest effects in the game. It is very, very good to be able to do. And Gallows allows you to take an enemy model and pull it. This acts as not exactly a threat extension, but it acts as a way to pull things in for peace trades when an opponent didn't necessarily expect it. The big downside to Gallows, and the reason that it is lower, is that it is a very random amount of distance, being d6, which is a very swingy number. Obviously, between 1 and 6. It's pretty extreme. Longtime listeners of the podcast know about Jaden talking about Gallows. I mean, really anybody that has run Gallows casters a lot has run into the instance of Gallows getting that infamous, like, 1 or maybe a 2, or where you do multiple Gallows and you get, like, a 1 each time, and it's just not getting you where you need it to be. That kind of a thing happens with Gallows, and that's part of why it's not a little bit higher on the list, even though being able to reposition enemies around is incredibly strong. It's a huge deal. So that's Gallows. It's a good spell, but not quite up to par with the next one on our list, which is going to be Chain Lightning. This one's got some very little text. So Chain Lightning is a cost 3, range 10 nuke. It is only POW 10, and it does electric damage. But it reads, a model hit by Chain Lightning suffers a POW 10 electrical damage roll, and lightning arcs from that model to D3 consecutive models. It jumps to the nearest model within 4 inches, then jumps again to the nearest model within 4 inches of that. It also, that's essentially it. It jumps to, so it can kill up to 4 infantry models. The reason that, this was a discussion I had for a moment, where basically I was comparing the spell to Ashes, because on initial read, Ashes to me felt like a stronger version of these two spells, because they're very similar. Then I was informed that Chain Lightning is boostable. The bounces of Chain Lightning can be boosted. I don't know why. That's absurd to me. That's very strong. This means that just having models near other models is potentially extremely damaging. Your casters can carve things out very effectively with this spell. It's a very difficult spell to position around. Now, I did want to say that generally I'm kind of disambiguating the spells from their casters or their factions and kind of doing them on their own merits, but many of the places where Chain Lightning is used also have really great synergy with electrical damage, so you're able to kind of crank up those numbers quite a bit. The other thing is that the damage that it does on the leaps is not considered to have been caused by an attack, which means there's a lot of really bizarre things that it gets around. It doesn't trigger Vengeance, it doesn't trigger Battle Driven. There's a lot of random things that it just doesn't really interact with. And Chain Lightning can be an extremely strong spell, especially if you have a caster with strong kind of offensive spellcasting stats, which usually Chain Lightning is on casters like that. The next spell we're going to talk about is Hellfire. Hellfire is a very simple spell. It's cost 3, range 10, power 14. Models disabled by it cannot make a tough roll and are removed from play. The main power of this particular spell is one, spot RFP, spot removed from play, is very effective. It's very useful. There are often specific models that if they are removed from play can really affect like how certain forms of recursion or things like that work out. It also ignores tough rolls, which means some really nasty solos can just be shut out, basically, instantly, which is fantastic. It's very strong. The other thing is that it is a POW 14. This is slightly higher than the other nukes on this list so far, and that's just very strong. It's just a really strong, chunky nuke. You can really rip chunks out of stuff with it. Even if you're just using it to like hit a heavy, it's a boostable POW 14 gun that costs you some focus. It's not the best use for it in the world, but it can do some pretty good damage. It's just a really strong utility nuke. It's one of the best just like I hit you with damage nukes in the game. Yeah, it's just a good nuke. Hard to get around that. The next one on our list at this would be number 6 is Force Hammer. So Force Hammer is cost 4. This is our first cost 4 spell. And it might be the only... No, there's 2 cost 4 spells on here, of course. It's range 10, POW 12, and instead of suffering a normal damage roll, a non-incorporeal model Force Hammer hits is slammed d6 inches directly away from the spell's point of origin, suffers POW 12 collateral damage, and the collateral damage from it is POW 12. This is just... There's so many things that this spell enables. Obviously, Gallows is very good in that it is a pull towards. Force Hammer, in some respects, being a push away can be worse, but in some respects it's good. But the big thing is that due to it being a slam, this means you can damage models behind the model that you slammed. This means that you can knock down the model that you slammed and models behind the model that you slammed. Many assassination runs, many games are won off the back of a Force Hammer. Whoops, you have a model slightly in front of your caster, big mistake, your caster is knocked down and gets shot to death. This kind of thing happens all the time. Force Hammer is very, very effective. It's an extremely strong spell. It's one of those ones that you're never going to be sad to see on a caster. The only real downside that it has is that it is cost 4. So anything you have to help like fix the cost of your spells or increase your accuracy to like make sure it hits, it's one of the big things is missing a Force Hammer goes from being like game ending one way to game ending the other way pretty often, where suddenly you lose because that's a lot of focus to dump into one spell that didn't end up working out. So there's that. The next spell up on our list, just above that, is going to be Breath of Corruption. Breath of Corruption is an incredible spell. It's cost 3, it's range 8, which is a little shorter range. The big thing is that it is AoE 3, and it is POW 12. It does corrosion damage. And it has a couple really interesting effects. One of the big ones is that models hit by the spell suffer a POW 12 corrosion damage roll. This means it does not do blast damage. It just does a POW 12 to everything under it. That is also, again, not blast damage. So things that are immune or with like blast resistance, it doesn't affect that in any way. It doesn't like interact with that in any way. It's just going to do its damage. The other part is that it is a cloud and a hazard. It stays in play. And it does a point of corrosion damage to models that are entering or ending their activation in it. This means that it's very good at clearing troops, especially troops that have charged into something and are very close together. It's also very good for if random, like, even decent armor solos are sitting a little bit too close to something that's a low defense. I have had so many times where I've been like, well, my really important solo is a little too close to an objective and just dies. Or even a warcaster. If this is a spell you're able to put out multiple times, and they're standing too close to their objective, or like a low-def warjack or something, you can just kill casters with this. The other thing is that if you have an arc node, or if your caster is just very, very close, if you're close enough, a deviation from the AoE from missing cannot leave your target, which means if you're able to get like an arc node close enough to a caster, this is an auto-hitting POW 12, which is great. It also has some utility in the form of the cloud that it leaves behind. You could put Breath of Corruptions in front of your army deliberately and create kind of clouds of death against like enemy weapon masters or anything like that wants to try to come in, and it can make it very difficult for single wound infantry to be able to move around effectively. You'll almost never kill anything with the 1 point of damage from this, because nobody ever is just gonna run single wound infantry into these, but it's a deterrent, right? It stops them from coming in on you, which is fantastic on its own. The next thing we're going to talk about, that was Breath of Corruption. We're going to go up to our number 5 here. Hex Blast. Hex Blast is cost 3, range 10. It's AoE 3 and it's POW 13, and the big effect that it has is that enemy upkeep spells and animi on the model unit directly hit by Hex Blast immediately expire. So it does have to directly hit. The AoE will not remove spells. So you do have to directly hit your target. This is just a good spell. POW 13 is very good. It's the ability to remove upkeeps is very strong. The fact that it is an AoE means you can randomly do some good work with it, so it gives it a lot of flexibility as just a nuke. It's like maybe a little bit high cost for just what it does on the baseline, but it also removes enemy upkeep and animi, which can enable so many things. Just having Hex Blast in your list is a huge deal for your ability to deal with a lot of different kinds of threats. There are a ton of very strong, like, defensive or defensive animi or upkeeps that you're going to need to be able to get through, and Hex Blast is very, very good at getting through those. I actually wanted to put it slightly higher on the list, but I'll admit it's partly because I've been using a lot of Ailish too, and he's not a warcaster, and I feel like that kind of taints the point of the list, because he's probably the silliest Hex Blast in the game. But on warcasters, it's still very, very good to have. It's just a good spell. Hard to really get around that. For our number 4 spot, we're going to talk about Disintegration. This is one of our spells that is on very few casters, actually, but it is cost 3, range 10, POW 13. And the big thing with this one is that a model hit by it suffers -2 armor for 1 round. It also removes from play if it boxes you. So this spell only exists on Lucas in Crucible Guard and Bethane 1, but it is very strong in both of those places. This is just a really good nuke that it's got that good POW 13 threshold, but the thing about this is that this spell is never POW 13. It is always POW 15 because you reduce the armor on hit, and this also enables the rest of your army to do an enormous amount of damage. This makes this one of the highest damage spells in the game, possibly the highest damage spell in the game as far as just a straight nuke goes. Not because the POW is the highest, but because you have to attribute the +2 damage effectively from every other one of your models in your army to this spell, right? So this causes an enormous amount of damage, and it hits very, very hard. Even just on its own, it's a cost 3 POW 15 nuke. Hits hard, does good damage. This is a gnarly spell. It's very good. I don't know what else to tell you. The next one we're going to talk about, this is kind of getting back to some form of model repositioning, is Abyssal Gate. This is another spell that is only on 2 casters, and not everybody can even tell me which 2 casters those are. Everybody remembers that the Dreamer has it, of course, but it is also on Goreshade the Cursed, which means this barely slipped out of being a unique spell. This is a cost 3 range 8 nuke. It is only POW 12. But when it damages an enemy non-warcaster, non-warlock, non-infernal master model, after the attack is resolved, you can place the enemy model anywhere completely within 3 inches of its current location. So, because this is about nukes, Telekinesis did not make it onto this list, obviously, Telekinesis being possibly the best spell in the game. And this is kind of the nuke version of Telekinesis. You cannot use it to move your own models around, but it is actually a more powerful effect than Telekinesis if you're doing it on an enemy and you successfully damage them. The weaknesses it has is that it is only POW 12 and it does have to damage, which means you often have to boost damage, and because it's such an important spell, you're often having to boost a hit as well. This just means that, like, it can get pretty focus heavy, or fury heavy to cast this spell, but it's very strong. This is a 3-inch enemy reposition. It's a teleport. You can turn them around. You can do whatever you want with them. It's just very, very good. The other thing is, obviously, it has the weakness of not really working on... same with Gallows and a number of spells, obviously. It's not going to work on huge bases or anything that can't be placed for whatever reason. But, like, battle engines, get wrecked. It's so strong on things like that. Flipping heavies around, there's a million uses for the spell. It's extremely strong. It's like, if you can consistently get it to hit and do damage, it's better Telekinesis. but only offensively, obviously. Yeah. Next up is our number 2. I actually thought this one was going to go lower, but when I looked at everything, I couldn't really put it any lower because this is Stranglehold. So Stranglehold is the lowest. It's like one of the lowest POW nukes that is on this whole list. Obviously, besides like Chain Lightning, but it's cost 2, which is amazing. I think every spell we've had has been cost 3 or 4 so far. This is a cost 2 one. It's range 10. It's POW 11, and a model damaged by Stranglehold forfeits either its movement or its combat action during its next activation as its controller chooses. Now, this part of the reason I wanted to put this spell lower initially is that it has lost a lot of value recently because Gargantuans and Colossals aren't forced to forfeit movement or activation anymore. That was part of what made this spell so incredibly strong, was that it screwed with it was a 2-cost spell that could make a Colossal just not function correctly. Which is it's probably for the best that that's gone. But at the end of the day, it's still extremely strong, partly because of its very low cost, and you can use it to just really screw over heavies. You can mess up peace trades. It's an incredibly strong spell at like Brawl Machine level, where there's just a lot fewer models on the table, but being able to just shut down, I mean, even warcasters, but like heavies and stuff like that. The only downside to this one is obviously, again, you're often probably boosting hit, and you're almost certainly boosting damage because this does need to damage to kill. Sorry, it needs to damage for its effect to come into play. So it can actually be a little more focus tight than it looks initially, but you can use this thing to cheat so many peace trades. The fact that you can just stand in front of heavies and it'd be like they can't get to you is very, very strong. It's hard to get, like Stranglehold is usually actually put on casters that are pretty bad at offensive spells, and they still use it. Stranglehold on a high focus stat super offensive spellcasting caster, and there's one instance of this, which is Wormwood, and it's very good on Wormwood. Somebody who can actually cast it 3+ times and has heavies that can cast spells for him. They can cast Stranglehold. It's ridiculously strong. Super, super good. This is a fantastic spell. Speaking of Wormwood, we're going to go into our number 1 offensive nuke. It's Hellmouth. Hellmouth is not in a ton of places, but boy, everywhere it is gnarly, and it defines those casters a lot of the time. This is a cost 4 nuke. It's range 8 only, and it is POW 12. The big thing about this one is how it works is it doesn't do anything at all if it misses. But if it hits, you push models within 3 inches of the model hit, 3 inches directly toward it in the order that you choose. Then you put a 3-inch AoE on top of it, and everybody underneath suffers a POW 12, and anybody who's killed by it is removed from play. This has a lot of things going on. One, probably the least of its effects, but it can be a really big deal when it comes up, mass RFP. This spell screws recursion and soul collection and all kinds of stuff really hard because it just removes from play huge amounts of stuff. The other thing is we've done some, so that the aspect where it pushes your models together and then puts the AoE on them. We've done some testing with positioning to try to figure out what kind of optimal positioning you can do with a unit. And there's virtually no way to not lose at least 3 guys to Hellmouth, and that's if you position really optimally. I think it's 3 or 4. It's a few. Across an entire unit. That's what I mean. To make it so there's no target where they can't get at least that many. It's very hard to do. This thing carves out solos. This thing pulls in casters. But the other part of it is also a positioning that does not specify enemy. This means you can target your own models with it to yank heavies and stuff like that forward 3 inches. You can use it to yank things closer together if they're close enough to a single object. You can use it to yank stuff around all over the place. This spell allows for so many just insane shenanigans with movement if you are clever about how to use it. We have actually done articles for sure, at least, about how to do Hellmouth positioning tricks. This thing allows casters like Agathon to have enormous personal threat ranges. He can actually get into melee with casters at absurd ranges and use his thing to send them to all kinds of crazy places. it's just a very strong spell and this is one of those spells that is limited by how creative you are. The more kind of creative with the spell you can be, the stronger it gets. Just as purely a like damaging, hey, I killed a few dudes spell, it's pretty good. But when you start getting into the top end of what it's capable of, Hellmouth is by far like one of the strongest spells in the game. It's incredibly powerful. It's hard to overstate how absurdly strong this spell is. So, yeah, there's that. Well, there we are then. So that's my top 10 non-unique warcaster nukes in Warmachine Hordes. Let us know what you think. If you want to drop any comments, anything like that, that would be absolutely awesome. Give this a like if you enjoyed it. Obviously, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you want to see more of this kind of content coming out. Yeah, let us know what you think about, like, what are some of your favorite nukes in the game. I'm obviously going to be talking at some point about the more unique nukes, and then other kinds of spells. Upkeeps, more unique spells, non-nukes, just whatever kind of stuff we feel like talking about. There's a lot of interesting abilities, spells, things like that we could talk about in the game that are just kind of fun to go over. There's also some really interesting trends, having to go through and write down every single spell in the game to kind of start figuring this out. There's some really interesting trends that I would like to talk about at some point as well, so let us know if that'd be something you'd be interested in. In the meantime, big thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon. You guys are absolutely amazing. If you want to check it out, it's patreon.com/LOSWarmachine. And of course, you can go to our website, loswarmachine.com, if you want to see all the wonderful stuff that we've got going on. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for approximately 21 minutes, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.